everyone. Today we're going to be talking about leadership. And this is an interesting chapter because leadership is a skill and something that people look for in a lot of positions and organizations. And, you can't apply for a job like to be a leader as the job description or the job title. A leader is something that's kind of expected in a lot of roles and something that people look for, a skill, a trait. They tend to put even in the job description, looking for a, operations leader or a marketing leader, or, they'll have like that kind of verbiage in a lot of the job descriptions, and they really try to find people that are leaders. And so today we're going to be talking about what leadership is, what it means, how people become leaders, some of the different leadership styles, and what it takes to become an effective leader in today's business world. And just not even just business, but like in all aspects of our lives. And it doesn't matter if you're working in a small business, if you're managing a team or planning to start your own, business one day, but understanding leadership is one of the most valuable skills that you can develop. And the neat thing about it is actually that there's outside of even this class, there's a lot of material out there that's free, a lot of TED Talks, a lot of articles. If you just Google leadership lessons, or even like what is leadership, how to study leadership. There's so many, things out there, resources that you can use. And I really encourage you, if you're interested in just kind of understanding it a little bit better, which I think is great for everyone. I really recommend, going out there and seeing if you could find articles or books. One of the best books that I read on leadership was given to me by a senator that I used to work for, and it was a book called the 21, I believe, 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. And in it, it goes through, 21, I believe it's 21 different things that, the author is John Maxwell, and he studies all of these different things and gives you examples and helps you really kind of key in on that specific law, as he calls it. And you understand it so well by the time you finish reading the book that it just kind of becomes like a natural thing as you go off in your own career. So I really recommend that book. It's called The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. Um, Follow them and people will follow you is the subtext of that title. So it kind of gives you a sense. But let's go ahead and just dive into it. So, what is leadership? Leadership is the process of guiding and influencing others toward achieving a shared goal. So it's interesting because leadership is all about inspiring, influencing, and motivating people to work towards something. So it isn't necessarily like the management, side of it that's very like technical. Leadership does not equal management, though they do overlap. But management focuses more on like organizing and planning and controlling, and leadership is more about that inspiration that, we can inspire and motivate people to do something. So think of a manager as someone who steers the ship, and the leader is the one who kind of gets everyone excited to be on board and going on this voyage. So leadership isn't just processes. It's about people and understanding people and being able to find ways of behaving, of interacting, communicating, and all of that to inspire and move and motivate people to want to work towards something. So I really want to differentiate between a leader and a manager. So a manager focuses, and this is in the context of think of like a restaurant. So a manager focuses more on like the schedules, the budgets, the procedures. So maybe the schedules for the employees are set, the food is ordered, and everything is running smoothly. And then you have the leader, maybe the owner or a passionate supervisor that motivates the staff and gets them excited about the shifts, about maybe the season, whatever that might be. Maybe they build that team spirit, that, it's that culture, and then they set the vision for like, okay, this is, what we're working towards, and maybe they get everyone excited about being able to offer the best, customer service to the clients, or the people at the restaurant. And so you want to they're both of these roles are very important, but you want to be able to have that leadership perspective on board because it's part of they work hand in hand. If you have the schedules and the budgets and the procedures in place, but you don't have the staff that's motivated and encouraged and inspired to want to do the best and offer the best service to the customers, then you're kind of missing that piece. So both roles matter, but um, leadership connects on an emotional level. And that's, I think, the takeaway here. So, how is it that people become leaders? Some leaders are given like a title that makes them a leader. For example, like a supervisor or a manager might be given that title, and people automatically assume, like, oh, well, that's the leader of our team or the leader of our organization. And then so you follow because you have, it's part of the job, part of your job to have a supervisor, to have a manager that schedules, that leads, and all that. But there's other leaders that might become leaders naturally. So these are informal leaders and, they might not have a title, but maybe it's like a coworker that really inspires and motivates people that, tends to have people wanting to work with them. You want to be on that person's team because you like the way they lead the teams and they do it really well. Maybe they help others. Maybe they set a really positive tone. So there's certain things that they do to earn that influence naturally and want to gain followership naturally, because people like working with them. That is informal leadership. And it's just as powerful as having the supervisor or manager title. But it's, you just don't have the title, but you still tend to inspire, to motivate, to, like I said, either treat others in a way that makes them want to be a part of your team, set a positive tone, and just do really well at bringing people together to work together. So leadership is a process. It's not just a position, and it might, just because you might not have a formal role doesn't necessarily mean that you're not a leader. It can come in different ways. So, how do leaders influence? Leadership is exercising power and influence. So, it's really that influence that's at the heart of what leadership is. It's how leaders move people into action and really inspire and motivate them to take action. So, French and Raven identified five main sources of power. There's reward power, the ability to give rewards. There's coercive power, which is the ability to punish. Referent power, which is personal appeal or charisma, expert power, which is a valued knowledge or skill, and then legitimate power, which is the actual authority from a position or rules. But not all power works the same way. Coercive power may get quick results, for example, but it may damage trust. And leaders who rely on expert or referent power, who are respected, trusted, knowledgeable, they ultimately end up building that stronger, more motivated team. So the best leaders influence because people want to follow them. They want to be a part of their teams. It's not because they have to. So here you can see the most effective of the sources of power. You got referent, expert, and rational, which is influenced through respect, expertise, and logic. The least effective, as you can imagine, is coercive power because it often creates resistance. And if you can imagine having a boss punish you, I don't think any of us wants to be in that situation or work for somebody or with someone who practices this any kinds of these like punishment tactics. So it gives you a sense of how people influence and what types of power they use to influence. Now, when we think of leaders and some of the characteristics or traits that that they have, and obviously we have our own experiences with leaders in our own lives, but the book identifies some core traits, and it's drive, leadership motivation, honesty and integrity, self-confidence, cognitive ability, knowledge of the business, and then they have some other traits that they identified. So with drive, they have that high level of effort, including a strong desire for achievement, as well as high levels of ambition, energy, tenacity, and initiative. So they have this very strong drive. They have an intense desire to help others. They just kind of comes naturally. They have a commitment to the truth. They have an assurance in oneself, one's ideas, and one's ability. So they have that self-confidence. And They have that cognitive ability, so they're conceptually skilled, capable of exercising good judgment, having strong analytical abilities, possessing the capacity to think strategically and multidimensionally. And then they have a very high degree of understanding of the company, industry, or technical matters associated with the business that they work in. So having, getting to know your organizations really well is a really good thing to do. And then they also have that charisma. Maybe they're creative, they're flexible, they adapt. So there's others, but these are the core traits that they identify in the book. So when you think about the leaders in your life, or if you see yourself as the leader, think about which of these traits you might already have and think about ones that maybe you could work on. So there's different leadership styles and approaches that are covered in this chapter, and I'll go through a few of them here. And the big takeaway is just that leadership isn't a one size fits all kind of thing. It depends on the people, it depends on the situation. So the first two here, we have Tannenbaum and Schmidt continuum, and this ranges from autocratic, where leaders make all the decisions, to free reign, where the team has the full freedom. So they showed that leadership styles exist on this spectrum, and it can range from controlling to empowering. And so there's just, there's a range. And then you have McGregor's theory X and theory Y. And these explain that some leaders assume workers need direction, and others believe that people want to take initiative. So, Theory X believes that people dislike work and they need to be controlled. And Theory Y is that people like responsibility and they, want to participate and do their own work without necessarily being controlled or being micromanaged. So, Theory X managers tend to micromanage people, and Theory Y managers tend to allow their staff kind of that freedom to accomplish tasks on their own. And then we have directive versus permissive leadership. And directive autocrat is a fast top-down decisions approach. Permissive democrat is where decisions are shared and its employees are very highly involved in the process. And a lot of modern organizations tend to favor the participative or democratic styles. They want leaders who listen, who coach, and they want employees and managers to share that decision making. And so you think of, for example, Jeff Bezos leaves an empty chair for the customer at their meetings. So it's more like a symbol of including them in their meetings and making sure that they're listening and taking the customer into consideration in their process. And so it's like kind of like the symbol of inclusive leadership focused on purpose. There's two theories that are talked about in this chapter. Douglas McGregor described two ways that leaders see their employees. There's theory X and theory Y. So theory X leaders believe that most people dislike work and they need to be closely supervised. And then you have theory Y leaders that think people want to do good work and they can be trusted with the responsibility to kind of do it on their own. So this impacts how leaders motivate their teams because on one end, in theory X, you don't think people like working. So you in your mind, you think, well, if they don't like working, they need to be micromanaged. So theory X bosses tend to be micromanagers, and theory Y bosses tend to give more freedom and trust their team to accomplish the goals. Um, and you see more of a shift, I think, to theory Y in today's business world. I think just people want to have the autonomy to work on their projects. I think most people hate and dislike being micromanaged. And I think most people tend to like their jobs more when people give them, the freedom and the flexibility, and the autonomy to go and work on the tasks that they're supposed to accomplish without necessarily being micromanaged. I think when managers trust their employees, I think it gives them that sense of like empowerment, to do their job. And I think that can be very motivating, especially for the younger generations that look for certain things in a workplace nowadays, like growth and, they want to work for a collaborative team. They don't necessarily want to work for someone that's going to be breathing down their neck the entire time. So these are different ways that managers view employees and how employees view their jobs. So, something else that's mentioned in this chapter is the trait approach to leadership. And this suggests that leaders share common traits, things like confidence, honesty, and intelligence. While early thinkers believe that leaders were born with these traits, we now know that leadership skills can be developed through experience, feedback, and through learning. It isn't necessarily something that you're born with, but you can work towards it. And I think that's the thing that makes it very powerful. Like I said, there's a ton of resources out there. There's TED Talks, there's articles, there's videos, so much out there, so much material that you can use to really grow and learn on how to be an effective leader. And it could be simple things like, why would people want to work with you? Why would people want to follow you? How do you deal with conflict? How do you bring people together? How do you provide feedback in a constructive way that makes people, welcome it and kind of view it with open minds and open eyes, open ears, just to kind of really take it in. So it's like the way you talk to people, how you talk to people, how you set examples. There's so many things. And so it's not something that you're just born with. Most of us, I think, have human interactions that we experience throughout our lives that help shape who we are and how we interact with other humans. But most of us, it's not like we take a leadership class in high school or anything like that. So this is a skill that I think is embedded within different elements of our education, but it's something that can be learned, something that you can develop. And I really, like I said, encourage you. This is, I think, one of the most important skills that you can carry with you to any career. So being able to take some of the lessons on how to be a good leader, and that's why I really like that book that I recommended because it really kind of sums it all up for you. So whatever you take from this class, find a leadership book and really try to pick one that is like an easy read for you and really try to go through it and understand what it takes to be a good leader. So then there's something called the behavioral approach, and this looks at what leaders actually do. So there's task-oriented leaders, which focus on goals and performance, and then there's people-oriented leaders that care more about relationships and morale. But the best leaders balance both. They care about results and they care about people. So you could have like a great coach that pushes players to win, but also supports them personally. Then you have situational leadership. And this just means adjusting your style depending on the situation. Um, and it could be so there's so many different situations that come up in a workplace and so many conflicts and crises that might come up, but there isn't like one right, there is no one right way to lead. So, for example, a new employee might need step-by-step guidance, while an experienced one might just need encouragement. But good leaders know when to be hands-on and when to step back. Then we cover something called Fiedler's contingency model. Fiedler believed that leadership success depends on matching a leader's style to the right situation. So, for example, you could have a task focused leader. They might do well in a crisis, while a relationship focused leader might thrive in a supportive team environment. So, the effectiveness depends on the leader and the situation match, and leaders should be placed where they fit best. Then you have the path goal theory. And this theory says that leaders guide followers by clearing the path toward their goals. A directive leader gives clear instructions, and then a supportive leader builds confidence in the employees. And then you have a participative leader, and these leaders often involve others in the decisions, and an achievement-oriented leader challenges people to excel. Then we have the path goal theory, and this theory says that leaders guide followers by clearing the path toward their goals. And there's four different styles of leading. There's directive, supportive, participative, and achievement-oriented. So under a directive leader, you have very clear instructions, kind of like here's what needs to be done. Then you have a supportive leader, and they focus more on building confidence. And then you have a participative leader, and these involve others in the decision-making process. And then lastly, we have the achievement-oriented leaders, and these challenge people to excel and really get those results. In some cases, leadership can be replaced by other factors. For example, you could have a highly experienced team that may not need constant supervision, or you could have an organization's strong culture like Google or Southwest Airlines that can guide the behavior without that direct leadership. So sometimes leadership isn't needed, but it just depends on the culture that exists within the organization or the experience and kind of really comes down to, the situation itself and whether, that team or that employee group needs that direction or not. Then we have something called transformational leadership, and transformational leaders inspire people to work beyond their own interests and work toward a shared vision. They communicate purpose and enthusiasm. So think of Elon Musk motivating innovation at Tesla and kind of what that resulted in. And then you have people like Oprah Winfrey, who empower people through media and philanthropy. I don't know if any of you have ever come across any of her videos on YouTube or any social media platform, but there's a ton of stuff out there where she really focuses on empowering people and through the work that she does. Then we have charismatic leadership. And charismatic leaders use their personality and their communication skill to inspire others. So that's like kind of like the charm. They can be very effective in energizing teams, but charisma alone is not enough. Some people have it and some people don't. And that can't be the basis of your leadership, right? So without vision and without substance, charisma can fade or even lead to poor decisions. So it can be powerful, but it's risky if it's over relied on. And so you just want to be aware of that. When you think of leaders in the 21st century and kind of what leaders look like today, today's leaders focus on empowerment, collaboration, and inclusion. I think the younger generations are really the ones that have shaped what that looks like today, the things that are important to them, the things that matter. And they really have no problem voicing those concerns and what their priorities are. And so the leaders of today really have to tailor to the, younger demographic that's entering the workforce because ultimately they're the ones that will drive our organization. So they build diverse teams, they encourage shared decision making, they want everyone to feel included, they want their teams to be diverse, and they want everyone to kind of own the business and own the decisions and ultimately feel that investment in making the company or organization better as a result. So with more people working remotely, and that's also something that leaders and managers have to figure out is how do you create that work environment when you have teams that need to work as a team but also operate remotely. And so having like remote leadership, which is something kind of new, is important. But it means creating connection and trust using technology and embracing it. And unfortunately, we have a lot of managers and leaders out there that are really against this piece. And I think that's really kind of a disservice because if you don't embrace technology and the changing workplace and the amount, for example, of times that people want to be in the office, you're really kind of losing an audience, a group, of employees, potential employees that talent that you're missing out on because you're not adjusting to the times. You're not embracing technology. You're not embracing remote work and finding ways of leading, remotely, essentially. And so that's a big thing, I think, for the future and looking forward. And so to kind of do a high level, what are the most important things in this chapter? And I think just to know that leadership isn't just a job title. It's not manager, supervisor, or head of HR, whatever the title might be. It's not about a title. It's about how well you are, how good you are at influencing others and motivating people and building trust with folks that are, either folks that you work with or folks that work under you. It isn't an all, one size fits all style. Good leaders have to adapt to changing times, changing situations. We talked about the remote work. That's an example of having to change and adapt, and not everyone is kind of moving on those, on those. I think innovations and technological tools that are out there, there's so much out there that now facilitates that remote work. And I think managers that aren't embracing those things are staying behind. And so you have to be able to adapt. And it doesn't matter if you are in a classroom, if you're leading a team, if you're owning a business. It's all about being able to effectively inspire, support, and empower others to work towards that shared goal. And so that's the big takeaway with this chapter is just think about the things that you have liked or disliked about supervisors that you had. And I find more often in my personal career, I find that the supervisors and managers that I felt were really leaders were people that tended to uh, really, they were willing to roll up their sleeves and do the work with the staff. I never got the sense that the people that I worked for that I believed were good leaders, I never got the sense that they thought they were too good for something. I always felt like we were all working towards the same goal, even if my job was different. I always felt that they were willing to roll up their sleeves and do the work that needed to be done. They're always willing to step in when a gap is there, when a gap is identified in maybe a work group. They're always willing to step in and, help the team. They always treated others with respect. They always included us in different things so that we felt ownership in the decision, in the project, in the work. And I think that's really important. But think about the leaders that you've had in your life, people that you look up to. What is it that makes them good leaders to you? Is it something that they do? Is it something they practice? Is it a way that they made you feel? And all those things are sometimes it's really hard to put it into words what it is that makes someone a good leader to us. But there's a phrase that I always come across, and it's people. I forget the exact words, but basically, people might not remember exactly what you said, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. And I think that's very powerful because a lot of times when people are managing teams, they forget that these are humans. These are people that have lives, they have dreams, they have hopes of growth maybe within the organization. And so it's your job as a manager and a leader to understand your employees, to understand your staff and help them grow and help them, have ownership, like I said, in the work and help them feel like you are partners. Even though you're managing them, you are a partner ultimately in their work, and you make them feel valued for their work. And I think when you spend the time to really get to know your staff and get to know the things that they care about, they do feel motivated and inspired because you are the boss, but you're not willing to, you're willing to roll up your sleeves, you're willing to do the work just like they are. And I think that sometimes people really admire that, that you don't see yourself as better than anyone else. You are another worker, you're in charge of them, yes, but you respect them, you include them, and you make them feel like they're partners in the work in general. So don't mean to repeat myself, but I just want to make sure that you understand those points and like I said, some of the things that have stood out from my own career. So anyway, please take the time either either after the semester while this class is here, but try to find a leadership book that you're really into and try to really read it, and try to take the most out of that book so that you can incorporate some of those lessons into your own careers.